The cry cut through the mountain silence like a blade. Elias Crow stopped mid-step, snow creaking beneath his boots, the pine wind freezing in his lungs. For 10 years, the high country had spoken to him only in groans of trees and the distant howl of wolves. It had never cried like that. He turned slowly, rifle lowered, heart pounding for reasons he did not yet understand. The sound came again, small, desperate, human. Elias followed it downslope to a narrow ravine where the snow had drifted high against a fallen spruce. There, wrapped in a threadbare blanket stained with blood and ice, lay a baby no more than a few weeks old. Its face was red with cold and fear, fists trembling, lungs burning with the effort to stay alive. For a long moment, Elias only stared. A mountain man had no business with babies. He lived alone by design, far from towns, lawmen and memories that refused to die. He trapped beaver, traded pelts once a year, and spoke to no one unless spoken to first. The mountains had taught him a simple rule: survive, and ask for nothing more. But this was something else. He knelt, brushing snow from the child's face with fingers that had skinned elk and carried coffins. The crying softened at his touch, as if the baby recognized warmth when it felt it. "Easy now," Elias murmured, his voice rough from disuse. "I got you." The blanket bore a faint mark, burned into the cloth, an old cattle brand. Elias's jaw tightened. He knew that brand everyone west of the Platte did, which meant whoever left this child here hadn't been lost. They'd been running. Elias looked up at the timberline, suddenly aware of how quiet the world had become. No birds, no wind, just the heavy stillness that came before trouble. He gathered the baby against his chest and turned toward his cabin. The cabin squatted against the mountainside like an old dog refusing to die. Smoke rose from its stone chimney by dusk, and inside, firelight flickered across rough-hewn walls. Elias fed the stove, boiled water, and did his best to remember what little he knew about keeping something so small alive. The baby slept on his coat near the hearth, chest rising and falling, unaware that its life now rested in the hands of a man who had sworn never to protect another soul again. Elias sat across from the fire, eyes fixed on the flames, memories stirring despite his efforts to bury them. He saw another winter, another cabin, a woman's laughter, a gunshot cracking through the trees. He clenched his fists until the ache brought him back. "I won't let them take you," he said quietly, though he didn't yet know who they were. Morning came pale and cold. Elias fashioned a cradle from an old crate and lined it with rabbit fur. He fed the child watered milk and whispered nonsense words that felt strange on his tongue. The baby gripped his finger with surprising strength. "Stubborn," Elias muttered, almost smiling. "That'll keep you alive." He named the child Samuel *, though he couldn't have said why. The name simply felt right. 3 days passed. Snow fell steady and thick, hiding tracks, buying time. Elias allowed himself to believe the world might forget them up here. Then, on the 4th morning, he found the tracks. Horse tracks. Fresh, deliberate. They cut through the ravine below the cabin, circling wide, as if the riders were searching for something they'd lost or something they knew was being hidden. Elias's breath fogged as he studied the sign. 2 riders, maybe 3, heavy horses, men who knew how to track in winter. He packed quickly, slung his rifle, and wrapped Samuel tight against his chest. The mountains had escape routes the lowlanders never saw, and Elias intended to use them. But before he could leave, a sound drifted up from below. A voice, Elias Crow, it called. You don't gotta hide. We just want what was taken. Elias froze. No one had spoken his name in 10 years. He stepped to the edge of the slope, eyes narrowing. Down in the trees stood a man in a long coat, hat pulled low, hand resting easy near his gun. Another rider lingered behind him, watching the timber. The first man tipped his hat. Been a long time, he said. You always did like the cold. Elias felt the past surge forward like a flood breaking its dam. Turn around, Elias called back. You're not welcome here. The man smiled thinly. See, that's the trouble. We ain't here for you. His gaze lifted just for a second to the bundle in Elias's arms. Elias shifted Samuel closer, heart hammering. Hand over the baby, the man said softly, and we'll ride away peaceful. Elias raised his rifle. You take one more step, he said, voice iron-hard, and this mountain'll bury you. The man's smile faded, his eyes hardened, filled with something cold and familiar. We'll be back, he said, and next time we won't ask. The riders turned and disappeared into the trees, their horses leaving scars in the snow. Elias stood there long after they were gone, Samuel stirring against his chest. He knew then what the mountains had been trying to teach him since the day he fled here. The past had found him, and it wasn't riding alone. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more tales from the wild frontiers of the human heart. Let me know in the comments what you think will happen next for Elias and Samuel. Thanks for watching. As night fell, the mountains closed in around Elias Crow, dark and heavy with a silent warning. He didn't dare light his lantern. Instead, Elias moved through the trees by memory alone, his boots finding stone and root without a single sound. Against his chest, the baby Samuel slept, warmed by layers of fur and the steady, rhythmic thud of Elias's heart. Every few steps, Elias would freeze, listening. As night fell, the mountains closed in around Elias Crow, dark and heavy with a silent warning. He didn't dare light his lantern. Instead, Elias moved through the trees by memory alone, his boots finding stone and root without a single sound. Against his chest, the baby Samuel slept, warmed by layers of fur and the steady, rhythmic thud of Elias's heart. Every few steps, Elias would freeze, listening. As night fell, the mountains closed in around Elias Crow, dark and heavy with a silent warning. He didn't dare light his lantern. Instead, Elias moved through the trees by memory alone, his boots finding stone and root without a single sound. Against his chest, the baby Samuel slept, warmed by layers of fur and the steady, rhythmic thud of Elias's heart. Every few steps, Elias would freeze, listening. As the baby fed, Elias's eyes fell once more on the blanket he was wrapped in. Specifically, on the brand burned into its corner, a broken circle with a slash through it. The Rook brand. His jaw tightened. The Rook Ranch sat south of the valley, a place of rich land, massive herds, and even bigger grudges. The baby fed, Elias's eyes fell once more on the blanket he was wrapped in. Specifically, on the brand burned into its corner, a broken circle with a slash through it. The Rook brand. His jaw tightened. The Rook Ranch sat south of the valley, a place of rich land, massive herds, and even bigger grudges. Its owner, Thomas Rook, had built his empire on a foundation of bullets and broken promises. Elias had known him once. He'd even worked for him, a lifetime ago, and he had loved his daughter. The memory hit him like a physical blow. Clara Rook, with her soft, easy laugh and her stubborn, unwavering courage. Clara who believed men could be better than their worst sins. He slung Samuel across his chest and began to climb the far side of the canyon, taking a treacherous path that only goats and desperate men would even attempt. Below him, he could hear voices rising sharp, confident, and closing in fast. Suddenly, a rifle shot cracked through the air. Stone exploded just inches from Elias's head. He broke into a run. He slung Samuel across his chest and began to climb the far side of the canyon, taking a treacherous path that only goats and desperate men would even attempt. Below him, he could hear voices rising sharp, confident, and closing in fast. Suddenly, a rifle shot cracked through the air. Stone exploded just inches from Elias's head. He broke into a run. He slung Samuel across his chest and began to climb the far side of the canyon, taking a treacherous path that only goats and desperate men would even attempt. Below him, he could hear voices rising sharp, confident, and closing in fast. Suddenly, a rifle shot cracked through the air. Stone exploded just inches from Elias's head. He broke into a run. He slipped into town just as the church bells began to ring, pulling his hat low to hide his face. A few heads turned at the sight of him. A rugged mountain man carrying a bundled baby was not something you saw every day. It was a sight that just didn't fit. Inside the general store, Elias bought a few supplies, his ears open, listening. Rookmen ridden hard, he heard someone whisper. He slipped into town just as the church bells began to ring, pulling his hat low to hide his face. A few heads turned at the sight of him. A rugged mountain man carrying a bundled baby was not something you saw every day. It was a sight that just didn't fit. He slipped into town just as the church bells began to ring, pulling his hat low to hide his face. A few heads turned at the sight of him. A rugged mountain man carrying a bundled baby was not something you saw every day. It was a sight that just didn't fit. Inside the general store, Elias bought a few supplies, his ears open, listening. Rookmen ridden hard, he heard someone whisper. You got a place a man could rest for a spell. She hesitated for only a moment. I've got a barn, and I mind my own business. That was more than enough. Her name was Margaret Hale. Her husband had died to winter's back, crushed under a fallen beam. She had no children of her own. Belle. She hesitated for only a moment. I've got a barn, and I mind my own business. That was more than enough. Her name was Margaret Hale. Her husband had died to winter's back, crushed under a fallen beam. She had no children of her own. She showed Elias where to hide in the hayloft, helped him warm Samuel, and didn't say a word when she saw the brand on the baby's blanket. That night, as snow began to fall again, Dry Creek filled with riders. From the darkness of the loft, Elias watched as Thomas Rook himself dismounted in the street below. He looked older now, harder. His eyes scanned the town like a man counting up his debts. Rook spoke to the sheriff. Elias couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. They were close, dangerously close. A moment later, Margaret climbed the ladder quietly. They're saying the baby belongs to Rook's daughter, she whispered, her voice barely audible. They say she died 3 weeks ago. Elias swallowed hard, the news a lead weight in his gut. Did they say who the father was? Margaret asked gently. Elias just shook his head, unable to speak. Down below, Rook's voice rose, sharp and carrying on the cold night air. That child is mine by blood, he declared for all to hear. and I'll burn this town to the ground to get him back. In Elias's arms, Samuel stirred, fussing. Elias pressed his forehead against a wooden beam, feeling his heart break wide open. Clara was gone, and the man who had destroyed everything Elias had ever loved was now about to take the very last piece of her left in this world. Elias lifted his rifle, his eyes burning with a new fire. This time, he would not run. The snow began falling harder, as if the sky itself wished to hide what was about to happen. Elias Crow waited in the barn loft, his breath slow, his rifle steady. Samuel, just a baby, slept peacefully against his chest, completely unaware that the men below were arguing over his fate like he was cattle to be claimed. Elias had run once before in his life. He swore he would not do it again. Down in the street, Thomas Rook's voice cut through the biting cold. "I know you're here," he called out, his words echoing through the deserted town. "You always were predictable, Elias. Did you really think you could steal what belongs to me and just crawl back into the hills?" Elias closed his eyes, a single thought burning in his mind. Clara didn't belong to you, and neither does her son. Below the loft ladder, Margaret Hale stood, her face pale, but her eyes unflinching. "You don't have to do this alone," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Elias looked down at her, this quiet, courageous woman, who had already risked everything just by sheltering him. He shook his head gently. "I have to finish what I started," he said. "That's the debt I owe." He carefully handed Samuel down to her. "Take him to the church cellar. Stay hidden, no matter what you hear." Margaret's hands trembled as she took the sleeping baby. "You come back alive," she said, her voice firm. It was not a request. It was a command. Elias managed a faint, tired smile. "I'll try." He climbed down the ladder and stepped out into the street. The snow swirled thick around the flickering lantern light, casting long, dancing shadows. All conversation died instantly. Men instinctively reached for their guns. Thomas Rook turned slowly, his face a mask of contempt. For a long, silent heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Then Rook let out a short, bitter laugh. "Well, I'll be damned," he sneered. "The ghost finally shows himself." "You killed your daughter," Elias said, his voice carrying farther than he expected in the still night air. "Maybe not with your own hands, but with your cruelty." Rook's smile vanished in an instant. "Watch your tongue. You wouldn't let her leave," Elias went on, his voice gaining strength. "You wouldn't let her love a man you couldn't control. She ran away because of you. She died because of you." Rook's eyes flickered, just for a moment, toward the old church at the edge of town. "That child is my blood," he said, his voice low and menacing. "I'll raise him right." "You'll raise him just like you raised her," Elias replied, his words like sharp stones. "Afraid, owned." In a flash, Rook drew his gun. Elias's was already in his hand. The first shot cracked the night open. Elias felt a searing burn in his shoulder as he fired back, diving for cover behind a wooden water trough. The street erupted into chaos. Horses screamed, glass shattered from windows, and men yelled in panic and confusion. Elias moved through the swirling snow and gunfire like a man already dead, every step guided by memory and a steely resolve. He saw Rook fall to one knee, clutching his side, his face contorted in pain. The old rancher stared up at Elias, snow beginning to settle on his heavy coat like ash. "It's over," Elias said, standing over him, his rifle aimed steady. "Let him go." Rook laughed weakly. a rattling sound in his chest. You think dying scares me? His eyes filled, not with fear, but with a regret that had come far too late to matter. You think love makes men better? Elias lowered his rifle. No, he said softly, but it gives them something worth dying for. Just then, the town sheriff stepped forward, his own gun raised. Thomas Rook, he said, his voice ringing with authority. You're under arrest for murder, intimidation, and conspiracy. Rook looked past him, his eyes distant now, unfocused. Tell the boy, he began, but his voice trailed off. His breath rattled one last time and then he was gone. Spring came slow that year. The mountains softened their harsh edges. The snow retreated, and life, stubborn as ever, returned to Dry Creek. Elias did not go back to the high country. He stayed. Samuel or Sam, as everyone in town soon called him, grew strong and happy under wide skies and patient, loving hands. Margaret became his mother in every way that mattered. Elias built a small, sturdy cabin at the edge of town, close enough to belong, but just far enough away to breathe. On warm nights, Elias would sit on the porch rocking Sam and telling him stories not of violence or vengeance but of winding rivers, brilliant stars, and a brave, kind woman named Clara, who believed the world could be a better place. Years later, when Sam was old enough to ask about his past, Elias took him into the mountains one last time. They stood together where the ravine met the trees, the very spot where a broken man had once found a crying baby and a second chance he never knew he was looking for. You saved me, Sam said quietly, looking up at the man who had raised him. Elias shook his head, his eyes misting as the wind whispered through the tall pines. No, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You saved me. The sun dipped behind the peaks, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and fire, and for the first time in a long, long while, the mountains were silent not with loneliness but with peace. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales from the heart of the Old West. We'll see you in the next one.